Welcome to the Voices of a Stranger podcast. Here is your host, Reza Garajadaki.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another session of the Voices of a Stranger. I'm your host, Reza Garajadaki, and I'm really excited today because I have one of my favorite friends in the world that I met at UCSB in 1990, a long, long time ago. And he's a very special friend of mine, and I know he has a very important message to talk about. I've known about his condition with epilepsy and having seizures for many years. And I thought it was an important message for him to share with you. So first of all, my good friend, Bryan Farley, who I call Farley. How you doing, Farley?
Doing really good. Thanks for having me on. This has been a wonderful experience.
Very good. I'm really excited to have you on. So listen, you know what the Voice of a Stranger is all about. You worked with me on the Wall to Caps campaign, and you're also a UCSB alumni. So I'm going to set it up for the audience, and we're going to go right into the meat of what you're going to talk about. So, ladies and gentlemen, Farley lived and grew up in Fresno for most of his life. He was a junior in high school. Like most juniors, he was enjoying his junior year in high school. He was a good athlete. He had a beautiful, wonderful girlfriend, lots of friends. And then out of nowhere, he had a seizure. And he realized very quickly, him and his family, that he was struck with having epilepsy. So I'm going to kind of pass the baton to you, Farley, but I want you to take us kind of like what life was like before, and then what happened when you had your first seizure. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. My life was pretty good. It was full. I'd finished a marathon the month before I had my first seizure, before school started. School used to start in September. I'd just gotten my driver's license. I was 16. Somehow I got a girlfriend, I was feeling like my junior year was going to be it was going to be wonderful. And I used to participate in debate and speech in high school. And we had a tournament. They were like all around the state, but this one happened to be at my high school. So I knew the place. And while I was preparing to go in for the first debate of the morning, I noticed that there was just something weird was happening with my body. Like it was like I was getting electrocuted, and I didn't know when. And I was standing in the hallway in a place that I'd been before because it was my school. But this experience on a Saturday morning, and it would jolt me, and it would pull my face, and it was just like, it was almost like, does anyone else see that? And they but it was just me, and it was, it was like real hard electric shocks, and I was like, oh, okay, but this will go away. And I went in and I tried to do the debate, and I did it, but I was still like these shocks, these jolts, and and I didn't know that was a thing, but it was happening. And I got right to the end, and I said, please vote for, and then my jaw, I got this super jolt, and my jaw was like it was ripped in different directions. I was like, and then a while later, I came to, not knowing where I was. What happened? I had a seizure, and I wore glasses even then, and I just kind of went. I hit my forehead and my glasses right on a desk. Plus, seizures it's like the body just, these kind of seizures just convulses for hopefully only like a minute and a half. And it's just like a full on, like intense. It's more than a sprint. It's just this, and I didn't know where I was. And I was trying to like patch, make things up, like where I was and where I'd been the night before. I said I'd been out to a nightclub. I was 16. I didn't go to a nightclub, but I tried to make sense of like where I was. I knew my name, I'm pretty sure, but then they asked me about my phone number, because then
So hold on. Did everyone gather around you? Give us the.
I guess. Look, I have no idea because I was out of it. And in seizures afterwards, I started to notice a little bit more people would come, but often what would happen, like, and this is an example, like I can still tell you what my phone number was when I was in high school. And I've been really good at remembering numbers. They asked me what my phone number was, and I knew that answer. I was like, oh yeah, it's like, I didn't know. And I was so exhausted and really started to be, as I started to come to, a little worried. I didn't know how long I'd been out. I knew that this was not like a normal for me.
Yeah.
And, um, and it's like, you and I have been friends since, you said 1990. This was September 29th, 1984. It used to be a day that I hated remembering. And then what just got to happen, like you and I, we've talked a lot about very intimate personal things in our lives. And this is something that I haven't shared until really very, very recently when doing this podcast with you. And it was scary. I mean, I was scared. I was disoriented. I was exhausted. I was hurt. I think I'd probably bit my tongue, because that happens often during seizures. My tongue would just be like, I mean, just grinding on it. And it was, and it's, even now, it's hard to go back to that, like those times, and talk about it. And there's a lot of reasons in why, like, I didn't talk about it, is that partly it was just scary to me. I knew it would scare other people, but I also tried to go on. And I ended up going to a neurologist. They did these tests, found out that my brain waves were irregular. They had an irregular pattern. They put me on medication that was, and back then they would have these intense drugs, and they'd give you a lot to get you. So it took, I guess, even I mean, I had to stop driving because of the seizure, but even the medication was so strong, I shouldn't have been driving. I mean, I wasn't at that point again. And the neurologist told my mom remembers, the neurologist said, you need to act like nothing's really changed. Just go on with your life. And I tried that as much as I could, but I also knew that there were like these ghosts who could like sneak up on me and just electrocute me. And I didn't know they were coming, And I mean, sometimes I have a little sense that's not like, I could almost hear like the scary noise coming, but I wouldn't know. And trying to figure out my body. I mean, plus I was 16, I was growing, I was still kind of changing, trying to grow into an adult. And it was hard. I know you mentioned, luckily, the person, my girlfriend back then, she somehow, like, she was fine with it. My friends were mostly fine. People close to me were fine with it, but they also didn't know maybe the extent, or they tried to be fine with it. Sure. And some of my friends would see me have seizures, and it would freak them out, and I
bet, yeah.
I understand, they cared about me. They didn't want to see this happening to me. And there was like the guidance counselor stopped talking to me about college. I was a top student at the time of the seizure. And then because I was always so medicated and drugged and had intense headaches, like, it was hard to keep up with school. But I think there was something else about having epilepsy. Wasn't going to be a person who went to college, I guess.
So, I mean, this is a different era too, right?
Yeah, by the way, this was before anything called the Americans with Disabilities Act had been signed, and people and they didn't know. That's partly why, like, hey, don't talk about it, because if you wear the shirts that I wear now, people will treat you. They may not treat you fairly, but that led me into, like, much of my life hiding what was going on with me. And I wasn't able to be honest with myself and only hide to other people. It got to where I started to believe either everything was okay, or if I used to have these things we would call blipelepsies, where it would be like that little shock, but it wasn't a big one. It'd be just a little. And I'd be like, oh yeah. And yeah, and I'd play it off, but I don't, like, other people might have bought it, but I started to think, oh, it's nothing. That happens. Or instead of realizing what that was doing to me, And it really led to, you know, in college, I had been a partier before I went to college, and I would still go out, but I wouldn't drink as much. I would drink early. Every so often, I would drink too much, and it's something that could lead to a seizure because stress in the body,
Sure,
dehydration,
of
lack of
course,
sleep.
yeah.
The alcohol does something with the brain waves, I think, where it like numbs them and then they flare. And whatever it is that I knew that I needed to not drink. I couldn't be crazy.
Yeah, and you went from high school to, into one of the biggest party schools back then and even now, our alma
Mhm.
mater, UC Santa Barbara. And I met you in Isla Vista. And I remember you didn't drink that much. You always monitored your drinking. But I mean, that's just crazy. You went to the biggest party school where partying
Yeah.
was a part of life, right?
Yeah, and people at UCSB didn't know this, but my high school was like more of a party school than UCSB. So
Right.
like I got there and like there were a lot of the kids at least there who they hadn't they hadn't been allowed to go out their whole life, and they finally were like, oh, and they'd be
Sure.
passed out by 6 p.m. I'm like, what are you guys like? I couldn't figure it out. Rookies. And because I didn't finish high school and go right to college, I mean I finished high school, I actually went and lived with my father between the year waiting for my application to be accepted after graduation. I lived in Las Vegas. And back then, like, as long as you kind of like dressed the part, you could go into casinos at any time. As long if I sat at one of the big tables, no. And they would bring us drinks, and some of my friends would come visit. And there were times I'd get, a little, I mean, it was Vegas, and and it was like it was kind of fun just to go out. But then going to UCSB, it could have been it could have been a lot more fun for me. But I was always aware that I had to watch what I was doing, and I still had seizures throughout that time. Not, I sort of learned what the signals were, but sometimes I would find out that things like I used to love playing chess. Like I don't play chess anymore because there was something where I think it's the checkerboard. Something for me. I have some of
Oh, yeah,
the,
patterns. Yeah.
the
Let me let me
photosensitivity.
let me ask you
Go
this,
ahead.
Farley. After you had your first incident, which was pretty dramatic, you're at this drama, I mean, this debate um,
Hmm.
event, and you pass out, you wake up. Were there other? I mean, I know you had some small, mini other ones, but were there during college? Were there other times that you had these
Oh
seizures
yeah,
where you?
that were in high school. Definitely, definitely. I had them at work. I had them when I worked at the record store in Vegas. I had one. I was refereeing basketball at the Boys and Girls Club in Goleta. I had one right on the court. Uh, I had one I had one of those like shocks while I was driving when I got my license back, and I didn't realize very close to dying in a hit and run, like not hit and run, head on collision. Uh, and there were other
Wait,
times
so you
where,
you got into a head on with because of the seizure?
yeah, I was on a windy road and I had a little like this, and the wheel went this way, and I was able to correct it, but I still like there was a truck, like a big, like not a semi, but like a big electric truck, and and I was knocked unconscious from that, and so I've been in ambulances more than most people. Certainly, like the first 30 years of my life, I'd been in a bunch. And I had one on campus walking to class, like third year at UCSB. And this is something that's sort of weird about epilepsy for me, is that I had a seizure on a lawn. I didn't, and I don't know that I'm having them. There's times I know like I'm going into them, but then once they're going on, like I don't know what's going on. I'm out, and then I come to, and I don't, and in this case, I didn't know where I was, but I looked around, and I don't remember like how I made the decision, but I was pretty close to my dorm, first year's dorm. But this was like year three. And I tried to use my key to get into my dorm room. And on the fourth floor, it was like, I don't know, it was like 4312, whatever the number was. And I had, my freshman year, I had worked with the custodial staff. So they recognized me and they probably like, what's he doing coming back? And then and I remember them saying that's not your room. I'm like,
Wow.
that's weird. I know it's my room. And then I went and I just laid down in the lounge and slept it off for a bit and then got back. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, how did I get here? But I remember all that like there were things I didn't know and then certain things I still knew. Just like that whole scramble.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this. I mean, it sounds like, and I wanted you to talk about, it sounds like time travel, like Bill and
Oh,
Reza and
yeah.
Brian's Excellent Adventure.
I've seen it, and I've seen a couple movies that do it pretty well. Whether or not time travel, you can make a movie that time travel looks right. I mean, there's too many things where it always looks hokey. But the part about it's like, okay, you're taken from this time
Right.
and suddenly thrown into a different time. And like, how would you respond? Like, I don't speak French. And if I were thrown into France in 1780 or 1805, and there's like Napoleon, like I couldn't say what's up Napoleon because I don't know French. Plus I would just be like I wouldn't know what was going on. And it's sort of what happens with sometimes with seizures is how it really disorients time. And even being unconscious for 5-10 minutes, knowing that the rest of the world went on and there's this gap in my memory. And it would take me fortunately, I've not been having these big seizures for a while, but it used to take maybe weeks before I started to feel normal again in my body because just the disorientation of being here and then suddenly coming to over here in a different place at a different time.
The other thing about you is when I first met you, and I've always been super hyper, and one of the reasons maybe we got along so well is because we were so opposite. But I remember for many years getting very frustrated sometimes with you because you would be so slow in getting words out. And we just talk about this when we practiced this podcast. We had
Mhm.
this conversation. So talk about how, the slow speaking, why you do that. And now I understand it, but for years it used to drive me nuts. I'd be like, get it
Yeah,
out,
and I know,
get it out for
yeah,
me.
I know that it did, and I know that it did, and like, and if I also been more honest with myself and with you, I could have been able to explain it because I know that you'll say, and I hear you say it, we're very opposite, but we're not.
Mhm.
It's just that I have a situation where I really have to make. At least I have this idea that if I get animated and excited, then that's going to be more likely to lead to a seizure. So there's times where I'm like, okay, I got to calm myself down. Now I do realize that's one reason I used to want to be a basketball coach.
Right.
I loved coaching. I love basketball. I also love baseball and coaching, but there was something about the basketball, the intensity, how quick things moved, like how you could make decisions right away to affect the outcome of the game. And the coach and building the team and making decisions is like a big part of it. But getting that excited, it it felt like it was triggering a seizure. And I don't know that it was or not, but I know that I felt that. So I would often be like very calm, like,
Yeah. Well, we
okay, let's
we
not get
coached together.
excited.
We coached together.
Yeah,
Remember 1 year
yeah. Oh,
for
yeah. Yeah.
the
I
YMCA.
still have the basketball, by the way, the signed
Yeah.
basketball from like 1993 or four.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I still want to coach again because I love that building up people, building a team, putting things together. And I love just my mind could be all consuming. But there was this other part that getting too excited in my mind could lead to a seizure. And maybe it could have. Maybe it was something else where way back when I had my first seizure, life was starting to get good. And then I somehow thought having fun and
Well,
getting excited.
I also remember we went to the UNLV basketball game at the Thunderdome, and of course I was loud and crazy, one of the loudest. And we used to get really excited about the game, but during the game you were pretty calm, and I always was
Well,
like,
no. But this is one thing that is. But I also dressed up for that game in
sure,
Gene Simmons blue and gold face paint with like a torn UNLV shirt of like I dyed a blue and yellow net to wear around my neck. I think I even had some of the blood, and that was like But even coaching, and this is probably why like I hold things in. Yeah, like when you and I talk sports during like a game, even now, I'm like, dude, just shut up. Like, but for me, it's not that I'm not paying attention. It's like I keep it so inside, and that was even before seizures. Like always, maybe it's because being a Dodger fan and they would always lose. It was like they'd get close and lose. But I would be that way when I was like rooting for the Lakers in the '80s. That I would sit and now it's still that way. Like watching sports, there's times I'm like, why am I a sports fan? I hate it so much. But I love like when they lose, I'm just like, oh man, like how'd that happen?
Let me
I'll
ask
get
you.
upset. I'll get upset about like a regular season baseball game.
Right, right.
That's just
Let me ask you this. This is important. So tell me about your family and how, obviously this was a shock for your mom. You went to college. Talk about how you change your lifestyle, the way you, because there's a lot of people who probably don't know a lot about epilepsy or they know somebody. So talk about how your family dealt with this and you had a very important, a tragic event that happened to your father and how that affected it. So talk about that a little bit.
yeah, and I do remember because I didn't know a lot about epilepsy, but I'd had a distant cousin who I met once, and she was a fine, she maybe twice. She was like a really sweet person, but I also had heard that she stayed away from the family often because she had epilepsy. Maybe hold on for just a second. Maybe she stayed away from the family because she just didn't want to. I don't know all the reasons. I didn't think to ask. Um, but by the way, my son's calling, and so I wanted to make sure I put him away. I'm a father now to two wonderful kids.
Absolutely.
Uh, my dad had been a highway patrol officer, and he used to ride motorcycles. So he knew how to deal with like real serious trauma
Sure.
because he would get to accidents before the ambulance,
Yeah.
like and he knew how to be calm. And he was of all the people. And this is kind of strange, is that this part isn't strange. Then when I get to how he died, more so, that he was the best equipped to deal with it. His mother, my grandmother, was horrible. She'd always want to know how you doing, how you actually taking care of yourself, and like, ugh, I don't want to talk to my grandma about that. And she didn't take care of herself, so why was she talking to me? My mom, my mom didn't seem to let it bother her much, but she also, she was aware of it, and we really for the like it seemed like we tried to pretend like it wasn't that it, like everybody was involved. I knew that my family was scared. I knew my mom was scared, especially. I knew my grandma was scared. So I would also, another reason why I would hide it, I didn't, to protect them. I didn't want them to know how often I came close to dying.
Sure.
And so let's just keep, and as a parent now, maybe I did the right thing, but it was, it was a lot. And went to college, I had a job, took a little while in college, but I lived a pretty full life still. And then got married right around 30, had our first kid. We bought a house, had our first kid. And then 6 months after that, my father, he never got to see his grandkids. He shot himself in the head. Um, and it's one of those things that I knew that stress is when people like, what are the triggers? For some people, flashing lights, but not everybody. But like stress, lack of sleep, dehydration.
Hmm.
And I was already borderline not sleeping with a 6-month-old at home. But once, I mean, it was traumatic. And I'm mostly an only child. It was a lot. And I knew, like, oh, wow, dealing with this situation is going to be very stressful. I need to get to like a support group. But it wasn't because I was like, oh, I want to deal with all the important issues around suicide. And it was like, I need to make sure I do this to lower my stress so I don't have seizures, so people don't find out that I have epilepsy.
Plus, your
And
father, yeah, yeah.
yeah, but and I've heard other people, like, they're like afraid to talk about suicide, but for me, I had to, because I had a bigger secret that I was holding on to. But going to these groups,
Mm-hmm.
there was something happened where I, like, I didn't feel guilt so much about my dad, but curiosity, like, well, how do you get to that point? And I still miss him. I don't know if he'd be alive if he hadn't, he would be in his 80s, but he would have loved my kids. He would have been a great grandfather. And but something got to him. And so I kind of wondered, I was like, I got to deal with regret also, because I don't want to become that. And then I was like, okay, I need to be more honest. And at some point, I'm like, wow, I need to be honest about epilepsy. And I was like, I wonder if I can be honest with myself, because I realized I was lying to myself. I had no thought that I would be honest with anybody else. Because for me, I was like, can I just be honest with myself?
Right.
And I set that as the goal. And there's still sometimes I, like, out of habit, I'm not honest about it. I'll be talking to a friend who has epilepsy or disability, and I'll still like conceal something, or like, because it'll be even about my plans. Like, some people are like, why don't you because it'll be like, okay, if I have a seizure, then I can't go to the airport, I can't get on the plane, then I can't make it there. Or even something about lunch, like, if I'm not going to feel good, I'm going to stay home on that weekend and sleep. Just things to take care of myself. But it's once I started to be more honest, then, and because I'd been an activist in other things, I knew that I wanted to do that. And it still took a while. Like 5 years later, I went to the first time I visited an epilepsy foundation. And it's a small office, the regional one in Northern California. I was scared to walk in and say, hey, I have epilepsy, to the people who are there to help those with epilepsy. And I was like, can I get out of the car? Like, oh my gosh, it's going to be hard. I got to do it. What can I do? I went to my first event. I kept going to a lot more events. And at some point, very recently, I'm a teacher. I used to teach photography and art, but I was looking during COVID, we could go to meetings. It was easy to go to meetings all the time. They were on Zoom. You could go them all over the world. And I would go to meetings for art, how art is good for people with disabilities.
Sure.
But there weren't people who were artists with disabilities leading the meetings. And then it would be something about teaching students with disabilities, but there weren't teachers that had disabilities, or at least weren't talking. So I started like, wow, we need to find the group. And I started asking people. And for the most part, the response was always, wow, that's a good question. Not like, oh yeah, the group's over there. It was, oh wow, we hadn't thought of that before. And I was understanding, because I hadn't thought to ask it. And I'd been a person with a disability and a teacher for a long time. But I decided to be a special ed teacher, and I've done this in other times. It's how you and I met, was like, okay, what can I do to make a difference after an event has affected my life? But where are the role models
Sure.
for people, like, especially for the students and for other teachers? And then I was just like, God damn it. Like, I guess I have to be the role model. Like, if I'm not going to do it, how can I expect other people to do it? Because I'm already pretty open about it. I know how to be an advocate. I know how to take pictures and increase visibility. I know how to speak in front of groups, but I don't really want, I didn't really want to do it. And it wasn't just the hiding part, but it's because this whole thing about visibility it's important, and it gives people space, but it's also hard to always stand up in front of people and say, here I am.
Yep.
We haven't paid attention. And it's important for us to see that.
Yep.
But having all these years and coming to terms with it's made me better. And I'm creating this project for educators with disabilities across the country. And it might go,
Right.
It's similar, like you found, like, this thing is like, oh yeah, that's, you should be doing Voices of a Stranger. Like, how did you not see it? Like, I just figured you knew. But this is also for me, it's like, because I've been working to increase visibility through my photography
Sure.
and storytelling. And this is a way to even show it's almost like I have an invisible disability, but that's sort of that's sort of a redundant term because disability is so invisible in our society.
Yeah, and I think it's great. I think, and also our society has changed, from the time when you and I were in high school. People are a lot more open. There's so many different avenues and advocacy. The counselors in high schools are better trained. Like you said back then, no one wanted to talk about it. When I grew up, also a lot of things, in certain things, you just would put it under the carpet. That was a cultural
Mhm.
thing, even in my culture in Iran and growing up in India. So, Farley, tell me, what is your message to families who have not just epilepsy, but disabilities that are kind of hidden? Mental health is a big issue in our country, as we both know. What is your message to families or people who are listening? Um, and what would you have done differently, or what do you wish you knew now that you knew back, know now back then?
That last question's a tough one, um, and I don't have a good answer for you because it there and there's it's a tough message to give to parents because I want to tell them, and especially as a parent, I want to tell them that it will be okay, but for some it's not, and um, but for the parents to help their young person find support, and the parents need to find their own support.
Yeah,
Because if not, what happens is that the kid, and I was that kid, takes on the role of being the parenting the parent.
yeah,
So they're at like, and you don't need to cure the person. Like I don't need a cure. But I need a place to be myself and to be that where there's some kind of sense of belonging, and that can be found. And I think one of the things about disabilities is that it really can impact anybody at
sure,
any time of our lives. And that there is this universality to it of needing to belong, feeling, and also trying to become honest with yourself and true to yourself, finding a community that will support you, finding people who will do more than just listen, but
sure.
like actually hear what you're saying and then make some changes so that everybody can be part of this global community. And it's there's no easy slogan. Like if that's might be my first slogan, there's no easy slogan. And that there's something really rich, there's something really possible in this sometimes like impossible situation.
Yeah, and there's a silver lining. This is great, and I think it's a great message. I know you very well, and you're incredibly intelligent. You've been very creative with your photography, and I've known parts of the epilepsy world of yours, but I never knew in depth. And it's been really eye opening. And we will leave some comments on the YouTube channel, also on my Instagram and Twitter on resources for epilepsy. So, Farley, after you're done, kindly send me some of the web links or even your project. Now, your project, how do people find out more about your project with educators and epilepsy?
Thank you, especially because I know there's a lot of us out there, but if you know somebody or you are somebody who is an educator or teacher and has a disability, please feel free to reach out to me. Um, and it looks like I might get some support from a national organization as well, so that I'm not self-funding the project. Um, and and that I've really found that these connections, I needed it when I was a kid, but it also turns out that adults, we still have that sense of, desire to belong and to be heard in a way that empowers us. And for many of the teachers that I meet and talk to, they're like, I'm the first person who's asked them, what's
Sure.
it like? And those conversations are really impactful. And and after each one I have it reveals a new thing. Then I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, I know that feeling, or I buried that, or yep, that was that way. And things can change, especially as we And it's more than just sharing our stories, but as we share and engage with some kind of compassion. But it's and I think that there's a lot here because it's important for the teachers and the adults to know that we're not alone, and for the students to see that when they're expressing their frustration, that somebody can mentor them from a place like of knowing.
Sure. Yeah, that's very important. You're absolutely right. Well, listen, this has been very enlightening. I know our audience who are listening to the Voice of a Stranger are going to enjoy this. They might have some questions. Anybody want to get a hold of Bryan Farley, you can get a hold of him through me, through my Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. But again, I am really excited. You are now my third guest on The Voice of a Stranger. And we've been working on this the last couple of weeks, but I think we really nailed it tonight. And I really appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability of coming out tonight and sharing this incredible message. So thanks again, Farley. I really, really appreciate it. And you know what you mean to me. So for those of you listening to The Voice of a Stranger, once again, thank you so much for your support. We will have another guest next week. Hopefully this was enlightening and you learned a whole lot about the world of epilepsy and seizures. So have a good night. Remember, you never walk alone, and stay passionate. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Reza.
Farley. Great seeing you, Farley.
Thanks for joining us this week. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or on your webpage at thevoicesofastranger.com. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend and subscribe to the show. Tune in next week for a new guest. Until next time, keep living life with passion and make each day count.